Okay, so today's lesson is on naming and classifying polynomials. This is your first lesson of this unit. So what we're going to do is fill in some of the blanks on these vocabulary terms that you need to know for this unit. There is a lot of terminology today, so it's important that you make sure you pause just to make sure that you have everything down. So we have a blank is an expression that is a real number, variable, or a mix of both. This is called a monomial. The prefix mono means one. So it's either a real number, one of them, one thing of the variable, or a mix of both. A blank is the sum or difference of multiple monomials, and that is a polynomial. And poly means many. When we are talking about naming and classifying polynomials, you classify them by two things. You classify them by degree and the number of terms. Another word for degree is just exponent, and you'll see what we mean by that in a couple minutes. And you should make sure to always write polynomials in what we call standard form. And what that means is that you always put them in descending order, going from the largest exponent to the smallest. So this means descending order, the largest, to smallest exponent. Okay, I noticed that it might be a little bit hard for you to see these pens, so I'm going to transfer to a little bit of a darker pen so that it'll be a little bit easier for you. So I had mentioned that we classify polynomials by degree and the number of terms. So I'm going to make a little chart that helps you find the names for these based on what we're talking about. So if your largest degree or largest exponent is 0, the name we call that is a constant. If your largest degree is a 1, we use the word linear. If your largest degree is 2, we use the word quadratic. If it's 3, we use the word cubic. For 4, we use the word quartic. And 5 is the last one that has a special name. We use the word quintic. Now, for anything after 5, all that means is that you say the actual number. So if it's the 6th degree, you would say 6th. And 7 would be 7th, and so on. So I'm not going to keep going because you won't see much past that, but that's our names for our degrees. So when we're classifying polynomials, you always need one of these words when you're naming them. The other half that you need is by the number of terms. So when we have the number of terms and the name we use for that, and I'm going to make another chart. This one's going to be a little smaller. Okay, so the smallest amount we can have is 1, and you already know that one from above. That's called a monomial, because mono means 1. If you have 2 terms, that's called a binomial. If you have 3 terms, that's called a trinomial. And if you have 4 or more, so 4 and any more, we just call that a polynomial. So if you have 7, there's no special word, it's just polynomial. So every time you name one of these, So when you name or classify a polynomial, you need one word from each list. So you need one from over here and one from over here. Okay, so now we're going to go over some examples to classify them before you practice. So examples. Number 1, 11x to the 5th plus 3x to the 3rd. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for my degree. So my degree is the largest exponent. So this is the largest. So that's my degree. So the word that goes with that, if I look at my degree with a 5, is quintic. So this is a quintic is one word. And then the second part of this is how many terms they have. So there is one term here, and there is another term here. So it has 2 terms. So it's a quintic, and then if I look at my list, 2 terms, binomial. And that's it. It is already in standard form because it goes exponent of 5 and then an exponent of 3. Okay, let's do another one. 6x minus 4x squared plus 1 minus 3x to the 4th. So the problem with this one is it's not in standard form. It's not going from the largest to the smallest. So what you have to do first is you want to rewrite in standard form. So that way you can name this. So what I like to do is I like to first figure out all my terms. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Now I go the biggest exponent. That's a 1, 2, nothing, 4. So this one comes first. So negative 3x to the 4th. Okay, then the next largest exponent would be 2. So minus 4x squared. The next largest one is between 6x or 1. So it's 6x. It's positive. So plus 6x and then plus 1. Now that it's in standard form, it looks like our first example, and now I can start to look for that information. So the biggest exponent is a 4. So if I go to my list, that's quartic. And when I think about my terms, there was 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 or more means polynomial. So that's a quartic polynomial. So sometimes you have to rewrite it first, and then you can name it. Let's do example 3. Five minus 6y squared plus 7y. Okay, so this is another example of when you have to rewrite it. So I will first make sure I have all my terms boxed so that way I can make sure I put the right signs with the right stuff. Okay, let's see what would go first. The biggest exponent is a 2, so I have a negative 6y squared. Okay, then I have a plus 7y. Then the 5, plus 5. So my largest exponent is a 2. So that means the name for it would be quadratic. And there's 1, 2, 3 terms. So 3 terms is a trinomial. So what I'm going to do for you here on the last example is I'm going to write one, and I'm going to ask you to tell me a couple things about it. And I'm going to pause it so you have time to do it. So let's do 7x squared plus 4x to the fourth. I want you to write it in standard form. Tell me the degree. Tell me the term name. And I want you to tell me the leading coefficient. And I'm going to pause it and give you a chance to fill it in. So if I'm looking at this and I want to put it in standard form, the biggest exponent is 4, so that term has to come first. So it would look like this: 4x to the fourth plus 7x squared. If then I want to name it by degree, the degree is 4. So that means it's quartic, right, which is right here. The number of terms, there's 1, 2 terms. So for 2, that was called a binomial. And now leading coefficient is new. Leading coefficient means when it's in standard form, that number in front. So that number in front here was a 4. So if I were to look at example 3, my leading coefficient in example 3 would be -6. And my leading coefficient in example 2 would be -3. So these are the kinds of questions that you're going to be answering in your practice today. You're going to be putting them in standard form, so biggest exponent to smallest, naming the degree from our left chart, naming the term from our right chart, and then telling us what the leading coefficient is, the number in front of the variable with the largest exponent.